Graham. This is the Global Digest think tank group. Yes, right now, what are you doing? Why don't you a little bit briefly introduce?
Yep. Well, I'm a journalist and have been for 41 years, would you believe? So 41 years ago, I trained as a journalist working on local newspapers here in the UK. And after 3 years, I ended up working in Parliament as a parliamentary reporter, reporting debates amongst MPs and members of the House of Lords. And then went from that to a TV program that was following a piece of legislation through the House of Commons. So that got me into television, so as a television journalist, and I stayed in that for about 5 or 6 years. And then in 1992, I became the editor-in-chief of Teletext Limited. Teletext was a TV-based information service before the World Wide Web. It had 16 million viewers a day, and it was where people went for their trusted information, trusted news, sport, weather, business information, that sort of thing. It was free. It was funded by advertising. And I was there for the launch in early 93, all the way through to just before 2000. Since then, I've been running my own businesses as a media consultant. But in the last 2 years, I have been focusing almost exclusively on the impacts of artificial intelligence on media, what I call human-made media. So media which is the result of human hands and human brains, um, authentic intelligence, as I call it as well. So it's the product of many, many people, but also sometimes individuals. So they could be illustrators, artists, photographers, filmmakers, special effects people, everyone that is going to be impacted by the revolution that we're now living through, the generative AI revolution.
Right, excellent. I'm not sure, have you ever been or have you ever covered news related to Burma?
I'm aware of the situation in Burma. I've been aware of it all my journalistic career, and the fight for democracy there, and the military dictatorship there. I'm very aware of that story. Um, as a working journalist would be. The problem with journalism, John, is that when you are in general news, and I was in general television news for a considerable part of my career, you know a little bit about everything, but you don't go into any great depth. And that is one of the issues that journalists have. So we tend to sort of skate over the surface and don't go too much below that. So I'm aware of some of the key characters. I'm aware of some of the issues, and obviously very aware of the impact recently that the earthquake has had, for instance, and how the dictator, the military junta there is having to appeal for help for the first time that it's never had to do before, and gauging the response of the world to that plea for help as well, given their previous behavior. So to answer your question, yes, I'm aware of it, but not as an expert.
Right. But I noticed several times, even in UN or UN related media, usually, the past 4 years after military coup, there was a lot of human rights violation and a lot of killing by military government and also opposition attack in the middle. The civilians are, suffering and die. A lot of people. Uh, you know, Sometimes you will never cover. Even the journalists, media, they never speak out even one word. I saw many times the press or news, maybe, you know, uh, Israeli Palestine news is every day. But, many case, Burmese atrocity is much more than Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but still in that time, they did not cover.
Yeah.
So apart from UN, because I'm talking UN because UN related to every country, all nations, and mainstream media, also Western news, sometimes they did not cover. And one of American colleagues said, even Burmese case, when there was a great disaster, even in the last previous years, they said American people, American news did not report it. They said, but when there was a hurricane in USA, American news report, he said. So in that way, media are doing, or how can you say, sometimes media are not justice?
Yes, it's a very difficult area for journalism. Um, all journalistic output, all journalistic organizations, if we put it that way, have to gauge an audience appetite for stories. But at the same time, an audience doesn't know something about a certain subject. So it's a responsibility of a journalistic organization to explain something. Now, we're very lucky in the UK that we have a tradition of public service journalism, public service media, where the BBC, ITV, and Channel 4 are principal broadcasters in the UK. They have an obligation to explain what is happening around the world to audiences. So we do have media organizations here and our newspapers as well, the Times, the Guardian, um, the Online Independent. You know, we have a very rich history of explaining the world to people here. The problem is that there comes a point where either through fatigue, a perceived fatigue amongst viewers, listeners, readers, that there's a sense that they know about this. They know about this story. We can't just continually say that Aung San Suu Kyi, for instance, is under house arrest because she's been under house arrest for how many years? We can't continually report that. It's no longer newsworthy. We need something new. Um, but then on the other hand, there are some stories where every single evening, yes, you're right, they continue to be reported. I mean, I remember in the very early days of my journalistic career in television, um, there was the civil war in Lebanon, and it was an incredibly complicated story to tell because at the time you had um, various warring factions within Beirut that were literally bombing the hell out of each other. Every evening, one lot of people would lob some missiles to the other side of the city, and then the next evening, another group of people would lob a load of missiles to the other side of the city. And that became an an evening story of about 15 seconds showing these missiles landing, but very little explanation. And because you'd had to explain all the various different individuals and tribal groups that were fighting each other. It just became too complicated. So all the audience got over a period of time was a sense that there's a civil war going on there. And then that drops off the radar because something else comes along. So I would argue it's not a deliberate uh, attempt on the part of journalists not to report, is that they have a finite amount of space and time to actually report the world. And there's a constant battle for attention and there's a constant battle to explain as well. And they have to balance those two things at the same time. But it is harder. The good news, I would say, John, is that there are new platforms. So platforms like Substack, um, platforms where journalists, a lot of very, very experienced journalists are actually leaving mainstream media to do their own thing. Um, Now, there's an issue. Obviously, they're not funded very well, and they need to make money from this as well. But those journalists are producing some very, very good eyewitness reports. Depends on access, of course. That's the other part of the story. If you can't get into a country, if access has been blocked and denied, then all you can do is report those people that are within the country and hope they're telling the truth. And that creates an ethical issue for journalism as well. But just to come back, as I say, we are living in a time where it feels like a golden opportunity or a golden moment for journalism. It's not all doom and gloom by any means, where we have a lot more platforms to actually report things that matter to us. I'm doing exactly that now around what I see as the atrocities in perpetrated, sorry, by the AI companies, the unjust theft of copyright from people all over the world. And I'm doing that, and I've got a following. People want that information. In the past, I would have had to have written that for a mainstream media organization, and they may well say, well, yeah, that's an interesting story, but the following week, what's new? What's new here for a mainstream audience? And my answer would be, well, there isn't really anything new. So your story then gets dropped, whereas I can continue to report this and build up a following of people that are interested.
So, as you said, Aung San Suu Kyi, she used to be popular in Western news. I'm not sure she was popular and she was reported many times in Western news because her husband is a British. And uh, Burmese issue, they pop up on the news whenever they want to do something or some engagement. Only that time by any Western government, its news was reported. If there was no any engagement from Western country, UK, Europe, US, then newspaper also, media also did not report anything. This kind of, correlation is there or just accidentally happen? Do you have idea?
What do you mean in terms of there was only really coverage because she had a British husband and that really made the story, it made her more accessible? Is that the point that you're making?
No, that is another thing. That's
Yeah.
the cases. But in terms of generally, in case of Burmese case, news never cover each mean intentionally or the newspaper and the government are correlated or I don't know, or just it just happened or accidentally, coincidentally.
Yeah, I think certainly from a UK perspective, um, you know, journalism waits for an event. They wait for something to happen, and we call that a hook or a trigger, something to hang your story on. Um, and then we go to an expert and we use that event, whatever that event might be, to then retell the story. Without that hook, audiences have no, you can't then say, there's nearly 200 countries in the world, and every one of those countries has a major story to tell. And there's major things going on in those countries. But we wait for something to happen, or we need an event to then tell that story about what's going on in that country. Um, but as I say, I don't think it's certainly from a UK perspective, I don't perceive this to be a negative um, thing on the part of news media. It's certainly not a bias. Well, let me take a few steps back. Um, all media is biased, and because there's multiple different meanings of the word bias. So what you're talking about, John, is bias of inclusion or bias of exclusion. So when we're pulling together a news list for a television bulletin, say your TV bulletin, I used to work on a TV bulletin that was 22 minutes, 45 seconds long. And the reason why it's so precise is that, we would give a reporter 1 minute, 15 seconds to tell their story. That's a very short amount of time. But in television, with graphics and with speed, you can actually get a lot of ideas across. You can explain what's going on in 1 minute 14. Yeah. Um, when you're putting together a news list for that that news bulletin, I mean, this was the days when there were big news bulletins at midday, 6 o'clock in the evening, 10 o'clock in the evening, that sort of thing. Now, of course, it's 24-hour rolling news, but even at the top of the hour, there are still 5 to 10 minute news, what we call a news belt. It's the most important things of that hour that we want to tell you. Yeah. Um, so when you're putting together that news list, you are looking for a balance of domestic stories. So here, what's happened in the UK. You're looking for stories which explain what's going on, say, lifestyle stories, politics, um, something which is going to make people feel good. So it's a bit more of a light beat entertainment stories, that sort of thing, maybe sport. And then world news has to be said, fights for inclusion. Now, as I said before, in the UK, we have a situation where our broadcasters are judged on this by their audiences, but also by a regulator. So, as part of the remit to be a broadcast news a network news organization in the UK, you have to show due impartiality. You can't be partial to a particular political party or government, for instance. And you have to show that you are broadcasting high quality news, high quality journalism, and high quality within that, there'd be a definition of um, reporting not just the UK, but reporting the world, giving viewers and listeners an idea of what's going on in the world. But as I say, if there's a sense that something is settled and there's nothing major going on, there is no reason to actually tell the story. We're waiting for an event, we're waiting for a trigger. So when the earthquake struck, immediately the history of Burma, of Myanmar, the whole thing, then that becomes the trigger to retell the story, to explain, well, actually, it's a military dictatorship, and explain the history of that. And that's what's been happening here. So we are aware of that. I mean, I remember going to America. In America, it's very, very different, as you probably know. Um, Local comes first. And in America, local is your city, your town. Even statewide stories fight for inclusion, and they certainly. So New York doesn't really report what's going on in California, let alone what's going on in Chicago. So they have a very parochial, inward-looking news agenda. But I remember going to America my very first time in the late 1980s, and um, their breakfast news at 8 o'clock in the morning, they're leading on supposedly a news story, which is a new way of making a pizza. I mean, that wasn't even a news story. It's light-hearted entertainment. And a lot of that style of entertainment, of presentation in news is a big thing in America, of telling a story in a very entertaining way. And they're good at doing that. But that means, other than watching um, networks like CNN, um, obviously the main TV networks, news networks, are very, very serious, but they're going to really be reporting what's going on in America before they're reporting anything going on in the rest of the world. And then they are dependent on having good people on the ground and good reporters on the ground that can tell that story.
Right, right. So as you said, earthquake, probably I hope all the people in UK know very well about Burmese earthquake and most other country probably. You know, it's uh, interesting is just before earthquake or immediately earthquake, still media are not yet come out, you know. Still nobody uh, very well reported, and a lot of expertise, geologists, nobody explained any properly before earthquake and immediately after earthquake, you know. So I'm not sure they are intentionally they abandon Burma or they totally throw away Burma from international image. Probably now many people know, as you said. So Burmese was, you know, maybe I mean British know more than anybody else about Burma. Was British, you know, already colonized for many years, and
Sure.
there was many experiences inside Burma. So British know more than that, but I'm not sure uh, British totally abandoned Burma in case of nature. I don't think so. You know, even British uh, maybe dissatisfied with uh, during Burmese independence or any negotiation because a lot of extreme Burmese politicians and you know those Buddhist and those left socialists, they are kind of betraying, violated the agreement
Mm.
between British and Burma, and they kick out British as soon as possible after independence, even though 10 years for kind of a British responsible for guarding, kind of training, something like that, Burmese military. But just before 10 years, after 2, 3 years, those extreme groups immediately kick out British. Even they don't want a single one to remain there. That is their intention. But I think during Burmese uh, independence and after, uh, I mean, I made a deal between British government and those Burmese uh, leaders. Mostly they are Buddhist left-wing group, you know. And there was also right-wing Christian and ethnic groups. But in political engagement, they unfairly they left out and uh, totally forgot them. And after British left, and after a few years, those Burmese left-wing group they control completely the whole country power, and they totally start suppressing ethnic group. That ethnic people still did not know, you know, political climate since at the time because they just very loyal and sincerely they were there. But
Mm.
the other side is not sincere and they left out. But I don't know, as you are British, how did you understand during Burmese independence a deal between British government and Burmese group? Maybe you did not aware.
No, not aware of that at all. And again, as I say, as a general journalist, you won't be unless there's a reason to go in to dig deep into what's going on in the many countries around the world where there are uh, continuing fallout issues, from a post-colonial age, and that is the thing. Again, it's not necessarily bias of not wanting to get involved or not wanting to understand the story. It's just there's too many other things to report. But that's where you rely on specialists and special correspondents that live in the region. Also, there's another role in this as well, John, to be said, which is the large global news agencies like Reuters, Associated Press, Agence France Presse, the French news agency as well, that have people on the ground. They are still well funded and they do have people on the ground. And so it still relies on an event. There still has to be that trigger, a reason to tell a story again. But journalists they have access to all of those, what used to be called the wire services, and they read those services. And that from those stories, that's how they're alerted that something is happening in the world. And then they will contact an expert or a journalist in the region or one of their own correspondents. Increasingly, it's one of those people from the Associated Press, Reuters, or AFP as well, because you need to have eyewitness testimony. You need to have boots on the ground, people who are talking to people in the region, talking and understanding, and have that level of detail.
I mean, yeah, very good, good memories, many old people during Burmese independence. So they still remember many events. But at the time, I know many ethnics are not politically strong and mature as well. And I want to say because now in this Burmese crisis and within 4 year military coup, a lot of ethnic, they gain back their own territory and they control their territory. So, and this earthquake, the regime dramatically weakens, not just within the population in the central part, and a lot of regime are already weakened, and possibly there is a chance for responsible for protect by international community, UN troop. At the time, UK, US can be emerge and again come back to Burma for rescues in this disaster. So you can have a say, you can save the Burmese left-wing Buddhist group. You were betrayed and you violated our agreement about 70 years ago when independent. So UK will go back according to agreement, and probably if any group are not independent, it should be 100% autonomous in the region, and there will be no more betray. That arrangement could be done, is possible, potential, Now disaster is so big and so crucial thing. That's the thing. But I don't know any politician or any leader in UK, US, you have any chance to, point out or pick up, or, you can see what's their opinion.
Well, I do have contacts and I do follow politics here very, very closely. As a former political journalist, it never leaves you. So it's like a disease you never get rid of. I can't shake it off. I'm obsessed with the daily political agenda, which is obviously now rapidly a global political agenda, as countries have to work out how they're going to manage in this new world, with President Trump. Um, but I'm very aware, and as and when I see people speaking out, I will let you know who those individual MPs are that have an interest in this. But there are a couple of people that I do know that will have an interest in this area as well, and have a political involvement. I can't say who they are, keep that to ourselves, but I might be able to put you in contact with people.
right? So if any idea come out and you see any interesting, let us know. We can say history will repeat again. You
Yeah.
know, those otherwise, after British left, Burmese independence are all of the years till today. We don't have any good time. Military coup up and down, and the other coup destroy and atrocity. So it
Yeah.
was very bad, experience 70 years. So we need to go back history and what's wrong. We have to look back and we need to rebuild again from and in you may know my organization as liberal democracy. Maybe you may see my podcast that will be, human oriented, human right oriented, but
Mm.
left wing Burmese uncertainty and uh, without clear direction and clear without clear ideology. That is problem. But we have clear stance, so we can stand together with uh, Western liberal democracy country. So that is my point, and that is my interest. So and as you said about funding, UK is example, BBC is part of funding, but BBC is doing very good, even though they are funded by government, a kind of partial government, we can say, not 100% independent media, but it seems very still good. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on that. But in Asian country, media are very bad. They get government subsidy, but their activity, they are not independent, and sometimes uh, they totally ignore, and
Yeah.
some are totally they are doing for very strongly for one side, especially for government. So that is uh, very restricted media and limited uh, in that in case of in Asia media. So I'm not sure you have any idea in any Asia media. How do you see?
Um, I mean, certainly from the UK perspective, we are lucky that our national news media here, so as you say, the BBC is funded through a license fee, a TV license fee, which is set by government. The BBC appoints the chairman and the director general of the BBC, but the news part of the BBC is incredibly independent, fiercely independent. So they report the BBC as if it's another company, and they're critical occasionally. But the BBC does have a very, very strict impartiality rule, so they tell both sides of the story. They're not allowed to just present something from a partial perspective. And that comes with its own problems because they leave it to the viewer or the listener to decide what's going on. So you have to decide, you get both sides of the story. And what the BBC is not allowed to do is to basically say, and on the balance of those two sides, we think this is the story. You have to decide yourself. Um, Newspapers here are unregulated. What's that? I'm absolutely clear. Newspapers here are self-regulated. They're not regulated by the main media regulator here in the UK as such, as stringently as the broadcast um, channels are. So they are allowed to tell a story from a particular slant. Yeah. And that is different, very, very different to broadcast media. Um, I'm very aware of the responsibility, when you've got a situation where a broadcaster is receiving money directly from a government, then clearly there's going to be problems. And um, the European Broadcasting Union. There's 54 members of that organization across Europe and other countries as well that are joining that, have joined that historically. Um, they always they have a really strong piece of research which shows that in countries where there's a very, very well-funded public service media, public service journalism, the European Broadcasting Union, which has it's about 54 members of all the major broadcasters across Europe, but there are other members of the EBU as well that are outside the main European continent. They all sign up to this sense, all the news broadcasters within that, of impartial news, and they have historically done a lot of research on the role of impartial, trustworthy news. And what they're saying, what that research clearly shows, is that in those countries with strong, open democracies, you will find well-funded news media. Take it the other way around. In order to achieve a healthy, functioning democracy, you need at the core trustworthy, impartial journalism and then trustworthy, impartial news media. If you don't have that, you won't have a properly functioning democracy. And that is probably at the heart of what you're saying when you're talking about the relationship between the financial relationship between governments and media institutions, that ultimately they're going to take the government line on a particular story. And then you ultimately have a situation that happens in totalitarian countries where, quite laughably, the which you see obviously in North Korea, where you see the news media there never saying anything other than the daily what they're told to say by the government, and that is so that clearly can never be the basis of a sustaining, well-functioning democracy, because people don't have the ideas, they don't have the
Oh,
information.
definitely. Not Korea is authoritarian. So our question for media, I don't think even they have proper media, you know, mostly used for propaganda probably.
Yep.
So uh, funding issue is very important, and generally I'm not sure. Uh, Maybe you know, worldwide most media are uh, declining. I mean, they because they don't have any fund resources, especially independent media. And but probably in UK and West, you can make a little bit more money by uh, your advertisement and many other funding. Uh, you can find more money, but such as Burma, those uh, poor country, and in spite of that, military restricted for independent media, there is no chance to make any uh, own money to raise our own money, our own circulating and raising money for ourselves. There's no
Mm.
chance. So that time, like BBC, state funding, state subsidy, it's very relevant.
Yep.
So in case of Obama, uh, a lot of media, independent media, are totally collapsed. Some are
Yep.
heavily depend on the aid. So uh, many are collapsed, and those who did not depend on funding, they still running, but it's very limited, especially human rights news, such kind of, uh, injustice, atrocity, like Burmese case. There are no commercial interest, no commercial interest. There's no chance to make any money. So do you think any if the Burmese case state is military cannot uh, sponsor or help anything about independent media. How do you think and what is chances and what is a way for independent media in Burma?
Yeah, I think the case that you raised there, John, about US aid, that unfortunately is giving governments around the world an excuse to basically say, what are we spending our money on? And also, unfortunately, that's being used by, certainly used here in the UK, because what happened recently is our international development budget was cut because we're about to enter a global recession. And this is what's going to be on the main part of the agenda now of every Western democracy, which is how do we manage this slide into some sort of depression. Um, and it's just a very unfortunate fact of life that governments tend to look after those who vote for them, and that's the issue. And so one of the first things that has been hit here has been the International Development Fund money. So it's a smaller version, but it's still the same issue. Where Trump went in and just slashed US aid and didn't probably they because of an ideological reason, they just saw the whole thing as a wasteful exercise. They didn't see the value. They don't see the opportunity here to encourage the emergence of healthy democracies, which over 10, 15, 20 years can actually then end up with the whole world becoming richer, which then benefits America. And that they don't see it that way. They see it in a very, very short, blinkered way of saying, no, what can we cut today? And that became the issue. The sources of alternative funding, I'm not an expert on at all. But all I can suggest is that there are other NGOs and other organizations, and you will be aware of all of them, that as government money retreats from that field, I would hope that the major charities, the major NGOs of the world then see that as an opportunity to specifically raise money for various ventures, and local democracy ventures, local news and media ventures, so that can continue. But it does depend on those NGOs having the funding themselves, and that's the problem. They're also being cut. So somehow they either go direct to the public and do their own new appeals, helped by organizations like Amnesty International, that sort of thing, where you've got the evidence, you've got the proof. This is why we're doing this. And then that could actually raise awareness and people would contribute. But that's going to take time. And it probably will never be as much as you had from USAID. And that is the issue. I mean, there will be individuals in America that will say, well, again, well, why were we funding them in the first place? There's nothing to do with America. But as I say, I think that's a very short-sighted, short-term view. And you can point to huge success stories around the world where America has helped democracies, fledgling democracies, and that prevents wars. It prevents situations where ultimately we all then have to step in and either manage that conflict or manage refugees fleeing those countries to the West. So it's better longer term to help countries. But I'm probably speaking from the point of view of one person here at the moment. You're fighting a political zeitgeist which is taking the alternative view at the moment. That is the unfortunate truth.
Right. You are conservative or you are left or what is your position?
I'm a classic floating voter. I'm a centre ground person. I don't affiliate with any political party.
You
Even
don't
if I
like
did,
any
John,
side. You don't like any. You don't go any side.
I do vote. I'm a very, very active participant in voting, and I encourage everyone in the world that has the right to vote. You have to vote. I would make it compulsory. I'm very, very strong on that. But you know, I tend to vote the way that I want to achieve change, and that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that's democracy, and you have to then accept that
Right.
what you voted for didn't work, and you then have to work with what you have. So, um, you know, political parties are here in the UK. We don't actually have as many as some of the European countries because we have a very different voting system here in the UK. We don't have a situation like there is in Europe where there are lots and lots of parties, maybe, 20 parties in some of the parliaments. And that enables people to have a very, very narrow interest. So I'm a particular person. I'm voting for you because I believe in a certain political outcome. We don't have that here. We have Labour, Conservative, Liberal
Only two.
Democrat, and now Reform. So, and then that's, in a way, that's a problem. You have to then go along with a much broader church of
So
ideas with the mainstream parties.
UK have only two, three parties.
That's right. Historically, it was just two, and then the Liberal Democrats appeared, and now it's another party called Reform. So we sort of have a four-party system, but when it comes to it, the Labour and Conservative are still the two dominant parties. In some parts of the country, you will have Liberal Democrat areas where, as time goes on, they will become Liberal Democrat um, safe, strongholds,
Right.
and those MPs will. What's happened? We've had a lot of turmoil in our politics here, John. So, and what we used to be known as a safe seat, where you'd have an MP with a majority of, say, 20,000 votes in an election, that was deemed a safe seat. But the last election, we had seats that, had 10, 15, 20,000 majorities overturned because of the voters' desire to see the end of the previous Conservative government. And that's what happens here every sort of 15 years or so. We have a very, very big electoral reaction to something. And we had that here definitely last year.
So I guess UK and US is similar in terms of political party. US also mainly two parties, Republican and Democrat. UK cases, Conservative and Labour Party. And I don't know, UK, most UK is also majority Protestant Christian. Anglican is Protestant Christian. The majority like that in US. The majority, we can say, Protestant Christian, right? Whenever they
Yes.
UK also, I guess, is Protestant majority, still majority or other religion in UK?
Um, it's probably right to say that religion and to a greater extent, race doesn't really feature as part of our identity politics in the UK. People identify with a political party, but unlike America, they don't wear that part. The majority of people in the UK, in America, you can you actually register as a Democrat or a Republican in America. You can find out what people's political views are by actually, inspecting voter lists almost in terms of how people are registered. That doesn't happen here. The vast majority of people in the UK, the Conservative Party's got less than 200,000 members in a country of, 65 million people. So it's tiny. Really, the Labour Party's got about three or 400,000 members. So these are tiny numbers. Most people are in the middle. All elections are decided by people in the middle, and they don't religion. Now, that's not to say that they're not issues within an election campaign, particularly race, but people don't. There isn't an affiliation of Labour or Conservative saying we are the Protestant Christian party. There are regions of the UK, particularly Northern Ireland, where that sort of is the case, but that's not the rest of the of Great Britain.
So in Conservative Party in UK is based on mostly which factor? In US recent case, probably, Republican is uh, backed by Protestant Christian. We can say like that in case of US. But UK, how you want to categorize labor and conservative, they based on if not religion based, they based on what category?
It goes back to the original founding reasons why we have a Labour Party. So you're right. The original Conservative Party was seen as the party of the rich, the party of landowners, the party of factory owners, those who owned, and I'm talking Marxist terminology here, those who owned the means of production. Yeah. And the workers historically never had a vote. So that they were discounted anyway. So it was only until about, the suffragettes, the females fighting for the right to vote. What also happened was that a lot of men then became able to vote as well, working class men. I mean, you used to have to own land to vote. Then it was you had to own property. And then it became everyone can vote. So everyone over the age of 18 can vote now in the UK. And that's obviously been the case for decades. The way that those two main parties split historically then has been that the Labour Party represents the workers and the Conservative Party represents the rich. But that's a very, very, these days, that's a very, very big stereotype. And that's not necessarily the case. In the 1950s and the 1960s, there were conservative governments that did very, very good things with house building. The Conservative Party here has always supported our National Health Service, which, very unusually globally, we have a free health service, which costs an enormous amount of money. And the Conservative, because they know they can't dismantle it, it would be a huge electoral problem for them, but they have supported it as well. And there are very, very good Conservatives as well that have a very strong love of their country and love of all people, and they want to help the working class as much as they want to help the wealthy. So it's a big, and on the Labour side, similarly, you have those who realize that capitalism is probably the best model, but we should have a fair form of capitalism where, we don't cap profits or anything, but where there is a sense that working people have a minimum wage, which is what the Tony Blair Labour government introduced, the sense of a minimum wage like it exists in America, and that people have a right to, a good standard of living. Where the two sides differ, Labour tends to be seen as the party that will raise taxes. Conservatives are the party that will reduce taxes. That means that Labour is seen as the party that will increase government spending, and that the Conservative Party is seen as the party that will cut government spending. But again, they are big, big stereotypes. Government spending went up under Margaret Thatcher, the best known Conservative leader in the UK of the last century, because unemployment went up. And, that's a big issue. And under Labour, we have had private money building hospitals. Labour has been involved in, it hasn't turned back. So the Conservative Party will privatize businesses like telephones, water, gas. Labour didn't overturn those when they came back into power. They just went along with it. So the differences between the two big parties today is it comes to the issues of the day rather than the big identity politics or the big ideological clash between the haves and the have-nots. That was really the battle in the sort of 1940s, 1950s, in the early days of the Labour Party. So the first big Labour government was 1945. There had been previous Labour governments, but 1945 was the big reforming Labour Party that brought in the National Health Service. Liberal Democrats are in the middle. So Liberal Democrats are on, and because they've never been in power, they have the absolute luxury of saying what they believe, and that's getting harder for politicians. As I say, countries are now like the UK. We're no longer part of Europe, so we stand on our own. We have no growth in our economy. We're still a very, very wealthy country, but the future is not looking particularly bright, and the future is increasingly dominated by what's going on around one person in America. So that is a real problem, and it's whether or not countries like the UK and also European countries can either stand against what America's doing and try to do their own thing, or whether or not they have to go along with America. And that is that's going to be the biggest issue of our times.
So maybe UK, you will have only Labour and Conservative, I guess. And, coming back to the, USA. In fact, I never received USA, and many other Burmese media they receive, but I know most of the USA or any overseas system receive those pro-left wing, that's the case in Burma. Mismatch, or how to say, the funder is a Christian liberal democracy side, but recipient is those lean to the left socialism in case of Burma and non-Christian. So we Christian and liberal democracy, ethnic minority, we did not get. In that situation, when Trump cut all the USA, in case of Burmese, like media, it's seemed nothing wrong, because he is doing the right thing, because the American people expectation and the fund was given was differently. So that is the case. So there's nothing wrong. You also said that Trump undermined, cutting USA flag on all media. That's true. But
Yep.
My point is, if he give to liberal and those Christian and mixed minority in Burma, will be the right thing to do, isn't it? How do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of the actual situation on the ground there, John. So I don't know what the true picture is. But what I will just say is, as I said before, which is that I don't think a great deal of attention will have been given to what US aid did. I think it's just seen as the whole thing was seen by Elon Musk and Donald Trump as a wasteful thing that they knew that the base supporters, the MAGA movement, would rejoice. They just see anything which is not money going to support US interests as a wasteful exercise. They don't see it as something which is worth. Now, within that, there's going to be some corrections probably. There may be the opportunity to lobby for, a new form of funding, but I doubt if it will come back. But they won't. There'll be other things that they have cut that they'll realize after the event. Oh, actually, we possibly shouldn't have done that because that does go against our political instincts. But they didn't pay any attention. They literally just probably just put a line through something on a piece of paper and said, no, this is going, this is going, this is going. And then they thought, oh, let's just get rid of the whole lot.
So, so that is US situation. I don't know what about in UK. UK overseas system also not that small, you know. It's also a lot of helpful for many countries, and and I think UK did not cut anything, but I don't know. I mean, same to USA. We also I don't receive either from UK, you know, UK, Europe. So how do you think UK will also? I mean, they can be more effective to you know did not get any opportunity that they should consider more.
Yeah, I think that you probably just need to lobby not just the UK government, but other governments around the world that have historically done this, you know, in the absence of the US aid money, to make politicians aware that there is this vacuum, that there is now a great deal of aid and support has been taken out of the system. And I think that's, you know, but it is going to take time to contact, as I say, not just governments, but also non-governmental organizations, the NGOs around the world, various arms of the United Nations.
Last time we have discussion about US aid and a lot of international aid issue. But according to our discussion, most funds are not really for any humanitarian aid. You know, always there was political agenda and many secret service, CIA, and those group agenda it is doing. They did like that. So we conclude not really the aid is always for purely humanitarian. But
I see.
in some cases, they did in line with humanitarian cases, but most of the time they did not. So that we discuss. That's why we expect that Trump might be reshaped or change it. And similarly, UK or other. That even political purpose, you know, as I told you, if you the aid, if you channel it properly, like in case of Obama, if you channel the aid to the left-wing media or left-wing who are never favor with liberal democracy, that will never go to the political agenda of liberal democracy country. This is related that I'm just explaining the case in Burma. So it's also, it can possible in many other countries, you know, like North Korea. So it's not make sense. You are funding to the Communist Party or Communist pro media by liberal democracy country, even though you support for press freedom, it doesn't make sense if you funding to the pro-communist media newspaper. So that's a lot of funding channeling is related to promoting liberal democracy in the other side, you know.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, John.
Have
Thanks
a
very
good
much.
day.